Hi, welcome to Books and Bocadillos. I'm so glad you're here. If you are here, I'm glad you're here because I know that you are just coming over from Ali's poetry party at the channel A Genteel Black Hole. I mentioned in that poetry party that I would be hosting an after party to further discuss the poem that I read. So if you haven't watched the after party and you just landed here by just serendipity, maybe put a pause on this, go check out Ali's poetry party number 2, and then come back and we'll be talking about the poem that I just shared for the poetry party. Okay, so if you're here from the poetry party, you know that I shared a poem from the collection When My Brother Was an Aztec by Natalie Diaz. I'm going to just share my thoughts about this poem. It's an amazing poem. Um, the poem was No More Cake Here. I watched interviews with Natalie Diaz in which she talked about how this collection is very much inspired by her family history, family experience, particularly her relationship with her brothers and her family of origin. And this poem caused some turmoil within the family. She's talked in interviews about how all of her family members got a copy of the book and gathered together and read the poem in each other's presence. And there was some distancing and some turmoil that lasted, I think, for a bit with her family members. And really, this is a story of a sister grappling with having witnessed her brother go down the path of addiction. This poem is full of grief, and I think the reason why I selected it in part is because I was looking for poems about cake or mentioning cake, because that was what I told Ali I would bring to the poetry party if we were meeting in person. And so in this particular collection, I really loved I love the mention of cake at a time of grief and grappling with grief. And side note, I tend to do that when I've had people close to me pass, or when I've supported friends through their having to bury their loved ones, or after a funeral service is over and the body's been cremated. In some instances, I'll bring cake. For a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's just nice to have something sweet when during such a emotionally bitter time. But it's also in times, at least for me personally, when my grandmother passed away, I brought the cake, and it was a way to celebrate my grandmother's life and influence and legacy. And so that's why I bring cake to funerals and after funeral gatherings. But anyway, the grief in this poem is, I think, one of the most difficult kinds of grief, because it's the grief of losing someone while they're still alive. Like, you've had to either part ways, say goodbye, end a relationship, yet the person is still alive. And I think it's just one of those situations and kinds of falling outs and loss that one can experience, particularly when it's within your own family of origin. Over time, in the last, several years, I've seen family members drift apart because of disagreements, be it social, political, behavioral, financial. So it's not just in my family, and not all of those things in my family, but just across the board, it's very common to hear people talk about the loss of a friend or a family member because of X, Y, or Z kind of situation where there's been a drift and there has to be a separation. And so I guess this poem hit me in that regard, and how sometimes we say goodbye and we imagine what it would be like to grieve someone while they're still alive, but while they're no longer part of our lives. And I connected with that process of thinking about an anticipated grief, thinking about that person no longer being there and that person passing, and it's hard and it's so sad and it's so heartbreaking. So I felt an emotional resonance to it, and I want to just kind of go through the poem again and just react to it on the spot. No more cake here. When my brother died, I worried there wasn't enough time to deliver the 100 invitations I'd scribbled while on the phone with the mortuary. Because of the short notice, no need to RSVP. Unfortunately, the firemen couldn't come. I had hoped they'd give free rides on the truck. They did agree to drive by the house once with the lights on. It was a party after all. And here, personally, for me, I'm just thinking about this one time during the pandemic, one of my nephews was having a birthday, toddler age birthday, and my brother asked if they could do the drive-by party at my house, and he asked if the fire department could drive through the neighborhood at the time of the drive-by party, because my nephew at the time was just so into fire trucks. And sure enough, the fire department came by. And so when I that was the first experience I'd ever had with the fire department doing that kind of service of just driving by. And it made me smile. It made me think of my own brother and my nephew while I was reading this. I put mom and dad in charge of balloons, let them blow as many years of my brother's name, jails, $20 bills, midnight phone calls, fistfights, and ER visits as they could let go of. The scarlet balloons zigzagged along the ceiling like they'd been filled with helium. Mom blew up so many that she fell asleep. She slept for 10 years. She missed the whole party. So in this stanza, the first part, I thought that was interesting about blowing balloons and the word blow, and how that word has multiple meanings, and like blowing money, right? Blowing phone calls and cash and investments and properties, and all the stuff that that when someone has an addiction, you just blow through, right? You just lose, and trying to save them, trying to rescue them, and that choice, that word, and the idea of blowing balloons and blowing time and money and resources. I thought it was clever. It was a clever use of the phrase. And the scarlet balloons zigzagging along the ceiling like they had been filled with helium. Then mom falls asleep. And then when you read the line, she slept for 10 years, she missed the whole party. Then that's when I think, as a reader, that there's some absurdity here, right? That, okay, this, you're getting ready for, this is going somewhere, and this is kind of an absurdist kind of poem, where it's creating, it's telling a story in an exaggerated way. My brothers and sisters were giddy, shredding his stained t-shirts and raggedy pants, throwing them up into the air like confetti. When the clowns came in, a few balloons slipped out the front door. They seemed to know where they were going and shrank to a fistful of red grins at the end of our cul-de-sac. The clowns played toy bugles until the air was scented with rotten raspberries. They pulled scarves from Mom's car. She slept through it. I baked my brother's favorite cake, chocolate white frosting. When I counted, there were 99 of us in the kitchen. We all stuck our fingers in the mixing bowl. The imagery of the red balloons gliding through the doorway and into the night sky, I'm thinking it's nighttime. That's what I'm imagining. And then the fistful of red grins and the clown, like behind the clowns, like I could just see the clown at the door, and then in the nighttime sky, you just see red balloons floating in like grins. I think that is really clever and beautiful and perfect. The toy bugles are funny. I can imagine the sound, and you can start to imagine what the atmosphere of this party, this funeral, this wake is like, with just the clashing of noises and the shrieking of a toy bugle and all the commotion. There's 99 people in this house, and the air was scented with rotten raspberries. So then that's letting us know that there's decay. There's something that's gone wrong for a really long time, and now there's a stench in the air. And I had to almost feel like I had to control my gag, because the rotten berries are just so gross to me, in the sense that they kind of automatically, the imagery of them, the seeing them, it causes this gag reflex for me. I won't, if you're as sensitive as me with that imagery, then I'll spare you the details, but I always kind of feel a little like pit in my stomach, like my stomach just kind of has a reaction to the rotten berries. In real life and in this poem, that's what I felt in my body, was just this kind of like, my stomach became a little uneasy, and then you're really waiting for something to make sense, right? Because none of it's all becoming a little bit absurd, and you're wondering what's going to happen next, right? Who's going to show up to this home? So the clowns, we're back to the clowns, and so they ended up pulling scarves from Mom's ear, and she slept through it. And then that tells you, okay, this is really, really absurd. But that also shows the denial, right? The denial of Mom. How long has Mom been asleep through this brother's addiction and behaviors and emotions, and how have they slept through it all? I feel like that's what the poet is telling us, that maybe there's been years to decades of maybe ignoring, maybe sleeping through, maybe denial of what's going on. And then she bakes her brother's favorite cake, chocolate white frosting. I thought that was interesting. It's the reverse of well, no, it isn't. I think a penguin is the black on black. But I thought chocolate white frosting is not something you see very often. I think sometimes the most typical kind of cake is like with I don't know, maybe in my experience, it's not a combination I would pair, like white frosting with chocolate. But I wonder if that is that like the chocolate layer is at like the darkness, and then the white frosting is maybe like the blank slate. Is that like a blank stare? Like maybe when you look at the brother, you just see eyes gone glossy and just like a blank stare. And so then the frosting is white, and then beneath that there's like a darkness that is hidden. I wondered. When she counted, there were 99 of us in the kitchen, and they all stuck their fingers in the mixing bowl. Now I'm saying she, and I could be wrong. I'm assigning a pronoun here, and I don't even know. But the poet is inviting people to lick the mixing bowl with their fingers, so to speak. Next. A few stray dogs came to the window. I heard their stomachs and mouths growling over the mariachi band playing in the bathroom. There was no room in the hallway because of the magician. The mariachis complained about the bathtub acoustics. I told the dogs, no more cake here, and shut the window. The fire truck came by with the sirens on. The dogs ran away. I sliced the cake into 99 pieces. Okay, this is chaos. And can you imagine, like, this is like the poet telling us this is what living at home has been like. The stray dogs coming to the window begging for food, hungry, and the feeling of desperation that you see in their eyes and you hear in their growls, and then turning them away. And how, like, what did those dogs symbolize, and how many people have come to the door in a state of despair. But also the stray dogs are probably common. I know in my community, there's certain areas where you see them a lot, and oftentimes in areas of high poverty, you will see stray dogs. So I'm also gathering from this section that perhaps they are very disadvantaged economically, and perhaps they live in a place that has a lot of poverty and a lot of hunger and despair. And then the mariachis in the bathtub. Not surprised that there's mariachis at this funeral, at this wake, but the fact that they're in the bathroom because there's no room, because there's a magician. The magician has to symbolize something, you think, and you wonder, what does a magician symbolize? What role would a magician have? Maybe is there this kind of wish that it would all disappear? Has there been a longing to see things just disappear, and maybe the magician is going to make tricks to help make things just go away or distract from what's really happening? The mariachi's complaining about the bathtub acoustics. So you're hearing, like, I can imagine the chaos of like everything coming at you. The dogs to feed, no more cake. The fire truck going by with the sirens on, creating more noise and alarm and attention and distraction. The dogs running away, and then slicing the cake into 99 pieces. The poem continues. I wrapped all the electronic equipment in the house, taped pink bows and glittery ribbons to them, remote controls, the Polaroid stereo, shop vac, even the motor to Dad's work truck. Everything my brother had taken apart and put back together, doing his crystal meth tricks. He'd always been a magician of sorts, and there we go. The magician in honor of her brother, who's been a magician of sorts, who's pulled things apart and put things together, and probably pawned things, I'm guessing, and made things disappear, if for a time, until they could be recovered. That's what I'm guessing. The poem continues. Two mutants come to the door. One looked almost human. They wanted to know if my brother had willed them the pots and pans and spoons. stacked in his basement bedroom. They said they missed my brother's cooking, and did we have any cake? No more cake here, I told them. Well, what's in the piñata? They asked. I told them God was, and they ran into the desert barefoot. I gave Dad his slice and put Mom's in the freezer. I brought up the pots and pans and spoons. Really, my brother was a horrible cook. Banged them together like a New Year's Day celebration. Okay, this stanza is a pretty long one. And the first thought that I have is when I read Two Mutants Came to the Door, the first thought that I get when I see that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I think of Rocksteady and Bebop. I never think of the turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as mutants. Somehow they just become a part of your family and you just identify with them, you know? And so these mutants actually did feel like mutants to me as a child when I would watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So I imagine Bebop and Rocksteady showing up to the door. And they wanted to know if they could have the pots and pans and spoons stacked in the basement. They missed my brother's cooking. And you just think about that practice, right? That the habit, the addiction, the behavior. No more cake here, telling them like get lost. And they weren't taking no for an answer, right? So they're like, well, what can we get from here? What can you give us? And then in a way that's almost, I think, why you would refer to them as mutants, or why the poet does in this case. Sometimes the people that come at you that feel like they're there to take from you, they're there to misuse, to take advantage of. You almost need to think of them not as who they really are, but who they've become because of their addiction. And sometimes when I think people are under the influence, I think one of the most difficult things is knowing that there's the person that there's inside and they're trapped and their behaviors are not matching who they are. So in a way, I feel like the poet is dehumanizing them to be able to cope and to be able to shove the door in their face. Well, the poet tells them God is in the piñata, and they ran into the desert. And running into the desert, that idea of running into the desert barefoot reminded me of like the story of Exodus in the Bible. And Natalie Diaz talks about how they use religion in a lot of poetry, like renditions, and religion is a big part of religion and faith are baked into these, no pun intended, but they're baked into their thoughts and the way that they think about life and about philosophy and so and emotions and kind of how it all comes together. But yeah, the imagery of watching these mutants who are human, but you've had to turn them away, so you dehumanize them, and then they're running into the desert barefoot. It reminds me of the story of Exodus, being lost in the desert for so long, as one might be when you've gone down the path of addiction. It continues with, I gave Dad his slice and put Mom's in the freezer. So Dad has been there, but Mom has been asleep and not here for any of this. And there's still the hope that Mom's going to wake up from all of this and that she's going to find her slice of cake and that she's going to rejoin and participate. So I think the idea behind putting Mom's slice in the freezer is the poet saying, but maybe there's still hope that she's going to reappear, that she's going to wake up, that she's going to be present. I brought up the pots and pans and spoons. Really, my brother was a horrible cook. Banged them together like a New Year's Day celebration. So taking what was part of the problem, part of the behavior, the addiction, and then banging them to create more noise, and also to perhaps indicate that this is a way of celebrating, bringing in a new era, a new year. And so there's more noise and maybe some hope. My brother finally showed up asking why he hadn't been invited and who baked the cake. He told me I shouldn't smile, that this whole party was shit because I'd imagined it all. The worst part, he said, was he was still alive. The worst part, he said, was he wasn't even dead. I think he's right, but maybe the worst part is that I'm still imagining the party. Maybe the worst part is that I can still taste the cake. And this last stanza, it like hits you. What? He showed up? What? So the first time I read this, I felt the sense of surprise, like, OMG. She's been imagining this, and he's upset, and she's smiling, and there's a sense of, you know, of distance, emotional distance, where sometimes when you smile because something hurts, but you're still smiling, and maybe also the smile of like, it got you, or, you know, how clever is this? But the brother didn't find it funny, and then says the worst part is that he's still alive. And that's even more of a gut punch, when the reaction that the person has to watching somebody celebrate their life and anticipating their passing is that they wish that they weren't, and I think that that's terribly heartbreaking. And it ends, I think he's right, but maybe the worst part is that I'm still imagining the party. Maybe the worst part is that I can still taste the cake. And that imagination of like, what a relief it would be if this was all over. And there's a sense of relief, and there's a sense of lightness in imagining that this problem, this person you've loved, that you've seen suffer for so long, is no longer suffering, and you almost kind of wish that pain would go away, that suffering would go away, and that longing for things to be different, and the grief for them not being that way. And I just felt so deeply um, that grief and that longing for wanting something to change, and imagining what would happen if they did. And it's truly heartbreaking that that a family, that people go through these experiences, right? And that sometimes there's this going down, taking your mind into dreams and imaginations and wonderings. And I really feel for this family, and I really felt for the poet, and it really struck me. And I think this is a really memorable poem that I'll always think about, just for how cleverly it's told, the way that the poet tricks the reader. And you know, that word tricks, the way, the tricks that the brother's been doing for so long. the devastation, the depth of that devastation, how it's depicted in so many ways in the chaos that is on the page. And the response that as a reader you get to that chaos, I think it'll hit everybody differently and it'll resonate in different ways. But I felt like I received it, and I thought it was such a clever story, clever poem. And I wonder what your thoughts are about the poem. Feel free to leave a comment if you'd like to share. I also just will list resources in the description box, because if anybody is struggling with addiction or depression or suicide or anything like that, then I don't want you to leave here without some resources or someone to talk to. But yeah, thank you for coming to the after party. I really enjoyed reading this poem. I think it's a wonderful work of poetry. And thank you, Ali, for inviting the community to join in on a celebration of poetry. Thanks so much for watching. Hasta la próxima.